Good afternoon from the Shreveport office of Eagle Financial Management Services for the October 15th edition of the Jack and Bill Show. It's a beautiful day outside. Happy Friday to everybody. It has been a strong week in the markets, really, this week, Bill. You know, we were talking about all the near-term volatility that we had, especially during the month of September. I think the markets peaked right around September the 1st. September, the S&P 500, I think, was down about 4.8 percentage points. And we have gained, last week we mentioned that we were 3.34% from an all-time high, and now it's more like 1.5%. S&P 500 on a total return basis through yesterday was up 19.5 percentage points and tacked on another 0.75% today, Bill. So we are now up over 20% again for the year, up about 20, call it 20.3%. And again, just a shade over 1% from an all-time high, which could easily happen Monday or Tuesday or next week with just any kind of good information. So
I think we could say that with this market moving back up, the action has been akin to bar hopping. I mean, we've seen market participants move from one leadership into another leadership. It's the cyclicals, that are leading again at the expense of technology.
Yeah, well, we've had some, I think, the financials have been strong. Now, the autos have been strong as well, Bill. The airlines have been weak because of higher fuel costs.
Oh, yeah.
Way higher fuel costs. So that's actually at the margin going to prevent people from flying because airfares are going to be prohibitively expensive, especially West Texas Intermediate rising. Last I looked, it was over 82.25 a barrel, up 94 cents, about 1.25% today. So that is, it looks to me like it's on its way, to 100. The broad market was mostly up today. Small caps were down just a smidgen. NASDAQ tech stocks up about 0.5%. So it was really a solid day. We've actually seen in the treasuries markets, I think with the strength of the performance of cyclical stocks, we've seen the two-year note yield climb to about 45 basis points. We haven't seen that yet. The Fed has publicly stated in the most recent FOMC meeting that we don't anticipate a rate hike until late next year. So 10-year Treasury note yield 1.57, and the 30-year 2.048 approximately, call it 2.05. That's been climbing the last month really, but came down a little bit this week. So that's kind of it's kind of a recap of the markets for this week. And what are we going to talk about today, Bill?
What do you think?
Inflation.
You sure?
I think so.
We talked about inflation some time ago, and the buzzword at that time was transitory.
Yeah.
So in the context of inflation expectations, the Fed was using this term transitory to say that what we were seeing back then would be temporary, and we would see the inflationary pressures subside as we pushed through the pandemic. Fast forward to today, and we're starting to hear some different things from the Fed. The Fed is clearly divided right now because the inflation data is coming in stronger. It's not subsiding. So the whole transitory narrative is at risk right now. And it's interesting when you look at the voices and what they're saying about this. We're hearing one thing from economists, and of course the economists don't always agree on things, and you get a room full of economists and you'll have a room full of differing opinions, but we are seeing very reputable economists coming out talking about the durability of inflation. But on the other hand, you have administration officials such as, for example, Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, who is sticking with the narrative, towing the line that inflation is in fact transitory. But you would expect that from an official of the administration. But whether we can parse these numbers, we can look at the historical data that's been reported, we can look at the forecasted numbers, but I would say this, Jack, just look at the actual economy. Look at what's going on. Just go outside, look in the stores, look at the bare shelves, look at the unfilled job positions. You go anywhere around town, wherever you live, and you see job wanted signs. This is not good. And then on top of that, the supply chain backlog, which is shocking. And there was a gentleman who was interviewed this week. His name is Noel Hasegawa. He's the deputy executive director of the Port of Long Beach. Now, Long Beach is the second largest U.S. port. He said it could be next summer, the summer of 2022, before the current backlog of 60 container ships that are sitting offshore get cleared. That is huge.
Yeah, Bill, I've really kind of wondered. I was listening to Larry Kudlow, and it's interesting. I think you have to listen to the lefty news and as well as the righty news, and to get a balanced, opinion on this. But he was talking about these supply chain disruptions and how all this stuff is temporary. Is getting solved now with the Delta variant, number of cases and deaths declining rapidly. It looks like I look at these numbers a couple of times a week. It looks like those numbers were tailing off dramatically, although they've climbed a little bit the last few days. But this may be something that Kudlow was saying, that the COVID pandemic opened up this can of worms about supply chain disruptions. Maybe something that was inherently in the system the whole time, but didn't really show itself until we had some problematic issues.
Yeah, I think it was. And of course, this is an anecdote. But it's not just the offloading of these container ships. That's not the only bottleneck. And just as the executive director of the Port of Long Beach was explaining, it's the port. It's all throughout the supply chain. There is not enough warehouse capacity. There's not enough truck drivers. There's not enough trucks. At the retailers, the people who are receiving the flow of goods, there's not enough retailer employees to process these goods. And, the other thing that's a factor in all of this, we've already talked about, the supply chain backlog, but it is gasflation. Okay. And that's what we talked about last week on the show. But the rising spiking costs in gasoline and natural gas. And, I like to throw out the term winter is coming. Winter is coming.
Or yes, even chemicals. I had a client call me yesterday, and he's doing a remodeling at his personal residence. Asked me what I thought about shorting Sherwin-Williams. I mean, that's a stalwart, $275 stock seller of paint. And my friend can't find any of the paint that he needs
No.
there. So you can't buy the paint that you need at Sherwin-Williams. So, I mean, how's this going to impact their earnings, going forward? And I looked at it, and I think that they missed earnings last quarter. Of course, I look at like I grew up in Virginia and Pennsylvania feasting on Utz brand pretzels and
Oh, yeah.
potato chips and snacks. And they've had some horrific problems with the supply chain. And it's impacted their revenues and, of course, their earnings. So,
We didn't discuss this last week when we were talking about fuel inflation, but well, actually, I think we did. Natural gas is an important component in fertilizer production, but I've read that in Europe there are fertilizer plants that are actually shutting down because of the energy crisis in Europe. And then let's just extrapolate that, and let's just think about what the impact of that would be on fertilizer prices and then food production. I mean, everything is going up. Everything. Well, go ahead.
Today's Wall Street Journal, there's an article in here mentioning in some of these emerging markets, and I think they were referring to Africa. I could find this in here, but food
You
inflation
need to get that.
no, I think it's a notification about my Facebook team. But
Important stuff.
Sterling Sharp is no longer questionable. He's healthy. His hamstring is healing up nicely. So, but 400% food inflation, 400%. Bill, our Federal Reserve likes to report core inflation, core CPI, the
Right.
Consumer Price Index, which is a basket of goods and services, but the core excludes food and energy.
And because they're volatile, yes,
yeah,
but they're important to our day-to-day lives.
I think most important, especially for the poor,
Yes.
emerging markets, for people who aren't, even for middle class and people below that. Food is if food can be a third of someone's income, and then think about heating your house.
Right.
With nat gas prices are up 115% this year, and West Texas Intermediate probably, with the rise today, approaching a 70% increase. Now that's perfectly correlated to the gasoline pump.
I read today, noted economist is forecasting that if we have a cold winter, the cost of heating a home in the Northeast in this country could increase 50%.
Yeah, I could see that.
But here's the thing. All right, what you were just saying about it, the effect on the low income population in our country, because the inflation is hitting things that we need every day. It is a political issue, and we don't like to get political on our show, but we have to consider the politics of inflation, the politics of these supply chain disruptions, because here's the thing. We will not get a solution without first a recognition that there's a problem. And the administration
Absolutely.
does not want to admit that we have an inflation problem. They cannot, for political reasons. And I tell you something that's really got everyone a buzz this week was an economist who was the chairman of President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors made a tweet this week, very tone-deaf tweet, saying that inflation and the supply chain delays are just high-class problems caused by declining unemployment. Well, when you hear that, when you're struggling to make ends meet, and you're going to the grocery store and you're seeing skyrocketing food inflation, and you're having to make decisions about whether to eat or buy gas, and you hear something like that, it makes you think, let them eat cake. Let them eat cake. That's what we think about that.
I'm glad that you commandeered some cake
Yeah.
for this meeting.
And how appropriate, it's a small cupcake, because that's what inflation does. It makes everything smaller. Isn't that right, Wes?
Yeah.
Yeah. Inflation is effectively a tax. And this is why the administration doesn't want to talk about this. It's effectively a tax on everybody. We have a tax system that's progressive, meaning that higher income earners pay higher tax rates. Well, when it comes to inflation, everyone suffers. You cannot target taxes or inflation. You cannot target certain segments of society, and it is the poor that pay the biggest price. And it's everything. It's affecting food, gasoline, as we said, consumer goods. And now people are saying Christmas is in jeopardy. Okay? You start telling the people that Christmas is in jeopardy, that they may not be able to get little Johnny what he wants to put under the tree.
Might excite me. I'm usually Grinch every Christmas.
Well, maybe it excites you, but it's going to get a lot of people upset. So again, don't expect our elected officials to be focusing on the problem of rising price inflation. All right. So here's another illustration of inflation. All right, Jack, you know what this is.
Silver certificate from 1957.
All right. What is a silver certificate backed by?
It used to be backed by both silver and gold, but this is 1 ounce of silver payable to the bearer on demand.
Mm-hmm. Now we don't print currency like that anymore.
I'm sorry, $1 in silver payable to the bearer on demand. Yeah, and it says right here, silver certificate.
Yeah.
So it's I think 1963 were the last series of these. 1971, 1934, we had a 40% reduction in the gold content of the dollar because there were countries like Japan, I think Belgium, some European countries that did not pay us back money that we lent them all the way back
World War II.
World War One even. And so, yeah, because that was 1934 before World War II. So, and then 1971 under Tricky Dick, Richard Nixon, we went fully fiat. So $1 in silver payable to the bearer on demand ain't happening anymore.
Ain't happening. So you don't see these in stores. And inflation makes your dollar look like this instead.
That is a real dollar.
That is a
isn't it?
real dollar. It's just been shrunk.
Yeah.
Shrinkage.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Hey,
they put a spider on the dollar right there. Now I don't know when.
Oh yeah.
When the see, this dollar doesn't have a spider on it, Bill. But somewhere in there, a spider crept in.
Well, Wesley knows about shrinkage because he goes to the grocery store and he'll see something. He can buy an identical product as he did previously, but it's got a smaller content. It could be like dishwashing detergent. All right, it's the same box, but it's got less in it, and they're using that to get away with, that's how they do it. Anyway, all right. How about this? Why don't we wrap up with this? So, how did we get to this point? How do we get to this point? Because this didn't just happen. I mean, there are
too
some
many
structural
dollars
issues.
facing too few goods. But I'll tell you, I'll give you the Jack's quick and dirty on this is maybe different from where you were going, but historically, 2/3 of all inflation, and inflation can be defined as just simply a general rise in prices. 2/3, or call it 67% of all inflation, comes from unit labor cost increases.
Yep.
And you can say 20% comes from commodity inflation. And so right now, there are a lot of families. If you have like a family of 5, I think you're getting like $3,000 a month from something like that from the child tax care credits. And imagine someone like that used to only make, say, 12 bucks an hour or $15 an hour and worked in the restaurant industry. Those guys aren't showing up to work.
No.
So now you've got the cost of labor. To hire someone, you have to really beat the bushes like crazy and then pay them more, give them incentives, give them a bonus, a cash bonus just to interview and talk to you. I mean, those are the kinds of things that we're seeing. So, and we've got an aging population, Bill. I mean, Asia, Europe, the United States, birth rates aren't what they were doing. You've got an older population with more people retiring each year and fewer young people. And we've reached a point in America where over half of the population right now gets some kind of a check from the government. Now, you can't call that entitlement because you call that entitlement to someone that just went on Social Security, for example. And
well, let's call it a transfer. I mean,
yeah.
that's what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, the government does not have money. It's a transfer.
Some of it is entitlement, some of it.
Right. But it's a transfer from tax. It's taxes collected from one segment of society transferred to another segment of society. The issues we're seeing now with unit labor cost inflation is really more of a lockdown pandemic issue. But we could go back further. I mean, when we talk about these as being structural issues, let's go back to the 1970s, 80s, probably more so the 80s, and moving forward from there, as we were really getting or embracing global trade, and I'm all for global trade. It certainly benefits a lot of folks because what you're doing is you are shifting production to those countries where the cost of production is less. And so as the consumer, you're paying less for goods and services. I mean, go into Walmart. I mean, how many items do you see on the shelves at Walmart that are made in America? They're not. They're not.
It's changing to more and more, though. We
will.
Went through this long period of globalization, and we've shifted to nationalism. But I've got to beg to differ with you just a little bit on this about the cost of labor. I think this is not a seasonal or cyclical, but a secular long-term trend in place.
I agree with that.
With the baby, I think part of it is seasonal, that's linked to the pandemic. But the baby boomers are coming of age, and at the margin, every day or every quarter or every year, more people are exiting the workplace than are entering. So you have to now you've got some other themes coming to play there too, with with increases in technology that can replace jobs and so forth.
Well, but we're also seeing a recent phenomenon of people just walking off the job.
Yeah.
Whether it's first responders, right? Police officers, firemen, emergency response system workers, nurses, doctors, airline pilots. All right. So we're seeing whole swaths of very qualified job holders walking off, and you cannot just replace these people. You cannot just replace a commercial airline pilot. You cannot just replace a police officer. I know here in Shreveport, we can't recruit police officers.
You know, there was an interesting story last weekend and through Monday, Tuesday with Southwest Airlines, because they had to cancel 10 to 20% of their flights because pilots weren't showing up. And really,
we don't know the whole story behind that, but
no, we don't. It could be because they're attempting to mandate vaccinations for every pilot and employee at Southwest, and it could have been a rebellion. I'm not sure about that.
Well, we do know in the city of Chicago that about 40% of Chicago police officers are willing to step down because they don't want to get vaccinated. Well, you can't just replace those people. And the governor of Illinois has come forth and stated publicly that he'd be willing to send in the National Guard. Well, the National Guard is not qualified to police. They can stand there. They can, fight off a mob, I guess, but they're not police
Not really
officers.
a place I care to live.
No. So, gosh, this has been kind of a bummer, but this is a topic that is, like I said, it's not something you're going to hear a lot about from the administration because, it will be used against them in the elections. You are going to hear it from Republicans who are out of power and want to regain the majority in Congress. But we need solutions. This should not be a political issue. We need actual solutions to this because it could get much worse from here.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if we have a cold winter, as you say, and you've already got nat gas prices are $25-$30 or higher because of the shortages in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And there are manufacturing entities that can't afford to run their machinery all day long. So, and that has to be passed on to the consumer as well.
Yeah. And then Europe becomes more dependent upon Russia for their fuel needs. That ain't good.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, one of us will enjoy a mini cupcake, and we wish you all a great weekend. Try to stretch the dollar. It's becoming harder and harder these days, and we are here to make money work, even in an inflationary environment.
We've actually anticipated secular commodity inflation for the last 2 years, and our portfolios are postured to take advantage of inflation and even rampant inflation, even in the fixed income markets. So there is a way to position yourself, and I might add, unconventionally, outside of the treasuries markets, without even giving up credit quality risk, or credit quality. So
we tell people we have a lot of tools in the toolbox and we know how to use them. We are doing well in an inflationary environment with our client portfolios. That's one thing. Today's show is really about just everyday folk in this country and the impact of inflation on everybody. And unfortunately, it's going to be lower income Americans that suffer the most. The wealthy Americans, they can handle this.
Well, what about Ed Ogeron? How's he going to handle it?
I think he'll be flush either way. I don't think he's sweating having to pay more for milk and gasoline.
I think you're exactly right, but he is going to be sweating the outcome of tomorrow's game. At 11 o'clock
That's true.
Central, the Florida Gators are invading Tiger Stadium.
Go Gators.
And I don't know what the line is. I haven't looked at that, but this job, my wife Stacy was asking me this morning, could LSU fire their coach mid-season? Well, William, he's 8-8 in his last 16 games, 5-5 last year in the abbreviated season, and 3-3 so far this year. LSU has 6 more games on their schedule. One of the games looks like a lock for a win. University of Louisiana Monroe, and the other 5 opponents are SEC teams.
I wouldn't even call it a lock.
All 5 of their SEC games left are against ranked opponents that include Ole Miss, Arkansas, Alabama, Texas A&M, and Florida tomorrow. So I think if LSU were to get blown out in Tiger Stadium tomorrow, I think that's it for Ed Ogeron.
Follow the money. Follow the money.
So, yeah, the
And-
Booster Club alumni, they've got the money. So, and they expect performance.
They do. All right. Well, that does it for another episode of the Jack and Bill Show. Next week, mark your calendars. We have a very special guest. We'll be interviewing. I'm not going to say. I will just leave it at that. A very special guest who is well qualified to talk about the Fed and monetary policy. So we're going to be digging into the black box of the Fed and talking about macro issues. So tune in next week.